2 Carpocalypse Now is probably one of the purest examples of a video game sequel that's out there. Totally iterative on the first one with a boatload of improvements to the overall gameplay, fixes to issues that original had, and all new mechanics that are terrible and nearly sap out your enjoyment of the game. Capitalizing on the success and media storm that ensued after the release of the original Carmageddon, Stainless Games immediately set about making a sequel that's somehow in even worse taste than the prior game, featuring even more motorized instruments of mass destruction for the player to commit crimes against humanity with. Carmageddon 2 is one of the few games out there that violates the Geneva Convention alongside Hatred, Manhunt, and Team Fortress 2. If you're a disturbed individual that posts on incel forums about the fall of Western civilization and speculates on the fatality count required to alleviate this problem, then I've got a game for you. So fasten those seatbelts, put on your helmets, and don't pay attention to that speed limit thing you just drove by, because we've got ourselves a... I try not to curse in the intros to these videos because I've heard YouTube doesn't like it, but now that the intro is out of the way, I'm just gonna come right out and say that Carmageddon 2 is somehow more fucked up than the first one. Making a follow-up to something that was so mired in controversy is always a challenge for a lot of reasons. There's the obvious nervousness that you get from publishers. You can get worried about negative publicity. In many countries, there's the ever-increasing risk of further censorship and outright banning of your work, and on the opposite end, you've got the sick bastards who actually enjoyed the thing who are gonna be expecting the next one to be even more gruesome. Plus, in addition to this, you've got all the standard hurdles to overcome when designing a sequel to a game that was well received and gathered a cult following. I can imagine everyone at Stainless didn't really care all that much about the controversy side of things. Hell, they probably loved it. But there's a clear vision in Carmageddon 2 that is an attempt to try and hone in on the elements that made the previous game so beloved. For the most part, I think the sequel improves upon the original, but it has a few pitfalls that really bring down the experience for me. Since I'm making this video under the assumption that whoever watches it has probably seen my last video, I'm gonna skip all the usual historical and industry setup and just jump straight into the part where I talk about what playing the game was like. As Carmageddon was a car combat game, the most important part of it was, of course, the cars. It's pretty widely agreed upon, at least as far as I can tell. The actual handling of vehicles in the original was not that great, something that has definitely been improved upon in the second game. Right from the start, I could tell that the actual driving part of the game was going to be a lot less painful. Cars feel more responsive, turning is universally easier, and spinouts and overcorrections seemed a lot less common. Unsurprisingly, the actual combat part of the game feels a lot better as well. There were some things in my previous video I didn't touch on, nothing major, just some minor annoyances that I didn't think needed pointing out in a script that already felt kind of unfocused and all over the place. The biggest one was that damaging cars felt somewhat inconsistent. Sometimes you just barely tap a car and fuck its day all up, other times you could hit an opponent head on at like 1,000,000,000 miles per hour and it was like the game didn't even fucking care. I think a lot of this is less an intentional move by the developers to make the game easier and more of just a product of general gameplay and engine improvements. While this stuff may seem like it makes the game a lot easier, there's one big change to the game loop that serves as a pretty big equalizer. You can die now. In Carmageddon, you couldn't actually die. You could fuck your car up 6 ways to Sunday, but you could always repair it during a race and you didn't have a health pool like your enemies did. In the sequel though, if you take enough damage, hit a wall hard enough, or get pile drive just right, you're gone. This change encourages more caution on the part of the player because now maybe it's not the best idea to crash straight into a brick wall at 350 miles an hour just so you can kill one pedestrian. It's not too unforgiving, but it can happen now and it's something you have to be careful about. To loop back around to what I said earlier about the game being more fucked up than the first, I think it's time for me to explain. Firstly, from a pure numbers perspective, you run over a lot more people this time around, with some levels having over 1,000 fucking pedestrians to eviscerate. Said pedestrians are also much more detailed and reactive. Aside from just running away, they have much more intelligible dialogue where you can hear them scream, cry, beg for mercy. Some of them freeze up like a deer in headlights, they tire out while trying to run away, and some literally get on their knees and start begging you not to hit them. Jesus Christ. You can also run over animals now, dogs, mooses, and penguins that make cat noises for some reason. The atmosphere is also so much more relatable. The original game had a kind of vague dystopian setting that I compared to Rollerball and The Running Man, but here everything just looks so normal. It doesn't feel like you're running over the denizens of a decaying society anymore, but just normal everyday people in late 90s America. Or Canada, I guess. I don't know where the hell this game takes place. The total lack of music doesn't help either. You commit your atrocities in total silence this time around, with the game being void of the heavy metal provided by Fear Factory. To be completely fair though, this wasn't intentional by the developers. The original release on CD had several songs from Iron Maiden playing in the background, which has since been removed from modern re-releases. I don't know, something about this game's presentation in general seems to lack the more blatantly fictional aspects of the first game and be going for something more original. You do get a cool intro movie on startup though. Too bad I don't watch intro movies on startup. Now the biggest complaint I had with the original was the way you unlocked other vehicles. Carmageddon 2 starts out similarly to the last go around with you having access to only one car, that being the Eagle Mark III. But, in a stroke of pure genius, some absolute Chad at Stainless implemented a new feature where all you have to do to unlock a new car is destroy it in a race and then buy it with credits. Holy shit! It's almost like that's what they should have done in the first fucking place. I'm sure by now you've noticed that in the background footage I've been using a much wider variety of vehicles than in my previous video. Since I used a much greater variety of vehicles, I won't be going in depth about every single one I drove, but I'll talk a bit about some of the more notable ones. The starting vehicle is the Eagle Mark III, basically an upgraded version of the Red Eagle from the first game. It's got much better handling and does more damage when it runs into enemies. Similar to its predecessor, it remains useful late into the game. One other thing is that if you angle the car right, you can see what your driver looks like in this game, which is cool, but the graphics on the character models make them look like Lego figures, which is some pretty hilarious imagery. The Piranha is a giant dune buggy that is the ped-killing machine. Seriously, you will never miss your mark with this thing. It's fairly good for wasting opponents, but there's better options. One of those better options is Kurt Blastoff, this dude in a biosuit who drives a rocket-powered sports car that handles really well and goes so fast that head-on collisions often one-tap opponents. There's a character named of Cynthia, this Two-Face cosplayer or something who drives like an older style sports car. This is probably my favorite car and the one I use the most. It weighs a good bit, so it can throw down with most of the other contestants all the way up until the final few missions, plus it's pretty damn fast. Once you get far enough into the game, you start to play with the big boys. Seriously, you start facing off against cars that are so big they take up the entire screen when you use them. Don Dumpster returns from the first game, but I didn't use him much because I was more focused on Mother Trucker, an old lady who drives a semi-trailer that reminds me of Darkseid from Twisted Metal. Once you get this thing, the game becomes a lot easier because you can just plow through opponents like I used to on my 2 work. I think the last notable vehicle to talk about here is Halfwit Harry's Loggerhead, which is this giant logging machine that you're basically required to drive in first person since otherwise you can't see a damn thing. I feel like this is a meme more than anything. Don't get me wrong, it wrecks shit, but you can't fit it through half the spaces you need to drive through, and I'm not sure if it can even go through checkpoints. As you can see, the vehicle selection in this game is pretty wild, not your typical racing game or even car combat roster of vehicles. Some other ones that stuck out to me were a fucking combine harvester and a literal dive bomber that some jackass is just driving around like it's a normal car and he's just going out to Starbucks. Also a forklift. They're really big on construction vehicles in this game. Alright, time to be a dickhead. Been going over all the stuff that I liked about the game so far, or at least thought was cool, but I hinted in the beginning that there was one new addition that almost ruins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, vehicular psychos of all ages and anatomies, I present to you the most fuck-witted, mind-numbing, dick-twisting, ball-busting, cervix-bruising, head-scratching, wrist-twisting, and God only knows how many other limb and organ-damaging phrases you can come up most fucking stupid addition to any game ever. Missions. Yeah, you know how the whole reason everyone liked the first game was because the whole point was to screw around in open-ended sandbox levels that allowed you to wreak havoc in an unfathomable amount of ways? Well, some guy at Stainless, presumably the real-world inspiration for Halfwit Harry, decided that wasn't good enough and you had to be forced to play through all these dumb fuck objective levels that aren't fun and divert my efforts away from the actual fun parts of the game. Make no mistake, these missions aren't really hard per se, just annoying, since many of them are basically trial and error fests that give the player almost no indication of what the hell they're actually supposed to do in several instances. All the openness and potential for player-driven mayhem is absent from these shitfests, with you instead being forced to complete specific objectives in very specific ways before you can get back to the races, aka the not races, because if you cross the finish line you're a loser, aka the fun part of the game, aka Carmageddon. Well, at least the fun part of the game up until towards the end. I've seen a lot of videos here on YouTube recently where I hear people describe certain games as fun to play but not fun to beat. Normally, I don't really get that criticism, but here I would actually level it at the game. The further you get into the season, even the races become more restrictive as you get less and less time to start with, checkpoints get more spread out, enemies get tougher, which prevents you from getting consistent time bonuses, and level layouts get more convoluted to the point where sometimes enemies can pretty much vanish with there being no apparent way to reach them. People who are intimately familiar with this game have probably noticed that in some of this footage, messages concerning 2 specific power-ups have popped up on my screen a suspicious amount of times. The reason for this is probably already obvious, but I was cheating my ass off at this point. I was running out of time to finish the game in order to be able to have footage for this video, and at that point I was just getting pissed off, so I went against my normally pretty strict no cheats on a first playthrough policy and just went hog wild with every nutty thing I could use to zoom through the last few sessions of torture. It sucks too because I think in a lot of ways the gameplay of Carmageddon 2 is better than the original. The handling and car physics is way better, combat is more fun, there's way more civs to kill, but these missions just really sabotage the entire experience by a huge degree. I think the thing that it really takes away from the most is the story. You see, the missions have a narrative story that they follow, which is actually quite in-depth. Unlike the first Carmageddon, which had no story arc to speak of, this one actually tells a very psychologically complex story of Max Damage's attempts to find some kind of safe haven in a world gone mad. As the world around him continues to spiral into chaos, a lone auto mercenary is forced to take on a series of increasingly audacious sabotage jobs at the behest of various extremist organizations who see him as nothing more than a tool with which to further their own insidious agendas. Due to his exploits in the first title, Max has become cursed by his own legendary combat prowess, with him being forced to mow down civilians in a genocidal attempt to eliminate all potential witnesses and buy him more time in hiding from vicious government death squads who are rounding up any potential stories. One of the only things the missions have going for theme is this story they depict of a violent man struggling to escape the cycle of bloodshed that he's locked himself into, desperately searching for a way out of the decaying society around him and crying to the heavens for reprieve from his own fractured state of mind, having achieved a state of blood simplicity where the act of killing has become second nature, a personal development that he once viewed with pride but is now mortified by. This is a really interesting narrative hook that would have been better served by an actually good set of missions, but it does provide the player with some motivation to push through them to the end. I'm also fucking lying, that was bullshit I just made up. This game has no story. Here's the on-screen cheat code to skip these stupid fucking missions, and by the way, Vlad from the first game is back and his car still sucks ass. OBS was weird about this game's audio, so that's why that clip was silent. Jokes aside, Carmageddon 2 is a good game that is held back by a small collection of major flaws that will affect your experience proportional to how willing you are to just say fuck it and look up console commands on Google. There are plenty of people who think this game is better than the first, and I can see why. Hell, I even somewhat agree. Outside the more miserable final levels and god-awful attempts at objective gameplay, this shit is fun, the perfect piece of candy for that imp on your right shoulder. It's fairly easy to pick up and runs surprisingly well on modern consoles. A lot of people commented on my last video that they played the first game a lot as kids, and I have no idea how many of them ever touched this one, but if you're one of those people or just someone looking for a macabre thrill ride, then this is a game that's worth adding to your Steam cart, or GOG cart, or Epic, or whatever the hell platform you get it on. Hey everybody, if you made it this far into the video, I just want to say thanks. It means a whole lot. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all your standard YouTube outro stuff that you always hear. And other than that, I'll see y'all in the next video. Goodbye.